Onegaishimasu. Let's start with Zazen. Mindfully optimizing the posture. Sinking the breath and filling the abdomen with the breath. Softening the gaze. Filling your awareness with your body posture and your breath. Consciously releasing tensions on the exhale. See if you can optimize the alignment of your spine, including the vertebrae of the neck. And take a few extra deep breaths. So breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth when you're breathing deep. And when you breathe in, it's an opportunity to imagine and feel you're drawing in fresh energy. Drawing in oxygen and fresh ki, fresh life energy on the in-breath, charging the body on the in-breath, and extra long out-breath, consciously feeling as if you're releasing tensions, physical tension, mental tension, emotional tension. So the in-breath is a charging breath, enlivening breath. Out-breath consciously is a releasing breath, relaxing, releasing, letting things go. Charging, life-giving, life-affirming. Breathing out, releasing, emptying. And after a few deep breaths like that, coming back to normal breathing in and out through the nose, but having the same feeling, in breath, it's a charging breath, charging you up, feeding you new energy. Out breath is a releasing, letting go breath. You have an opportunity to let go on each out breath. Rub your hands together. Charge up your hands, including your fingertips. Just like you're starting a fire with a couple sticks. Charging up those hands and then gently rub the hands over the face, forehead, cheeks, eyes, and neck. Good. And use the ground to come up, relax down, release down, relax down, let the ground push you up. Good, and let's grab a bokken or a jo. Again, if you don't have an implement, just keeping your good extension out. When we don't have the physical bokken, we're always, our body and our mind is all we need. The fingertips are the tip of the sword. This is the te katana. Te is hand, katana is blade, hand blade. So just point your fingertips up, your sword tips up, and energize your hand blades. Focus your mind on the tips and the blades. If you have a bokken, just do a high bow to the shoman wall, blade towards you, and then blade up on your left side. So we're going to do a warm up using the tool. We'll start with a Y stance, a light horse stance, and as you warm up, you can bend the knees a bit more. And before we start using the training tool, let's get the body shape and movement correct. Shift the weight and turn the hips. Pressing into the ground to move the body. So not throwing your mass around. Let the ground move your mass. Release down, press the foot into the ground, and let that pressure down, the ground presses back to shift the weight and turn the hips. Press down, descend you the other way. So pressing down shifts the weight and also turns the hip. And this also reminds us that we're not using our upper body, it's the ground and lower body. The shoulders are relaxed. Okay, and then we'll start basic Seigan, even though we don't have a ready stance, but we start with the tip slightly up and well out without locking the elbows. Just a couple details. You want the hands on top, not on the sides. So wrists on top. Grabbing mainly with the last two fingers and thumb. It's kind of like you're squeezing toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. In martial arts, we call it small circle. It comes from small circle jiu-jitsu. Little finger first. That's exactly how we hold the weapon, and that's exactly how we use the weapon for a strike, a ski, or a cut. Squeezing little finger first. And same body action, and we're just gonna do yoko cuts, side cuts. Keep that extension out, not in close to the body. So if you're empty hand, you could just imagine you're holding. And again, it's a matter of body dynamics and body unification, coordination. That's the important thing. Doesn't matter what you have in your hands. Use the legs and hips. Those of you with experience, try to make that cut very sharp, very lateral, very even. And then, as you may know, if you start with the tip slightly up, that makes a cleaner yoko cut. In other words, we don't want to scoop. We don't want to have a scalloping action or scooping action. And if you start with the blade totally straight, we'll tend to have a scooping action before it straightens out. So it's just a helpful tactic. We start with the tip slightly up. When we start the actual movement, it keeps it cleaner, nice and straight. Now, make sure you want to use proper weapon dynamics. And part of that means the back hand, in this case, the left hand, is doing all the driving, the steering and the driving. Front hand, the right hand, is just a guide and just connected to the weapon. The left hand, the back hand, is doing the steering and the driving. So that means the left hand is going to be turning the sword over, turning the blade over. It's the left hand, not the front hand. And the left hand is going to be doing the driving. The left hand, the back hand, does the turning over and also the driving. So the left hand does the steering and the power. The ultimate root of the power is coming from the ground, through the legs, through the hips. And let those arms, shoulders be relaxed. But because you're strongly flowing out, extending ki out, focusing your attention outward, that makes the body have that shape. So there's a basic phrase or principle. Our structure is made by our current of intention. Our shape is made by our flow of intention, not by our muscles and not by tension, but because we have a strong current of intention, strong flow of focus, that's what shapes the body. So that's why this is out here. If my mind is collapsed, my mind is not dynamic and not focused, then everything gets sloppy and collapses in. So everything is out. Extending ki, flow your attention outward from your heart, from your center. So part of this is warming the legs and hips. So really exaggerate that weight shift and hip turn. Again, you're not leaning though. Sourcing the movement ultimately from the ground. Okay, now we're going to do angle cut. Angle cut. So I'll turn the same way to get us started on that. It's going to be the same body mechanics. Bring the sword over the right shoulder, shift the weight, turn the hips, cut diagonally down to the left bottom corner. Again, keep that well away from your body. Energy out through the tip of the weapon. Something in particular to watch out for when we cut down, that we don't want to pop up that back leg, or that back hand rather, where it gets light and floated. It's floating here, can lose the weapon, it's not secure. So left hand is always extending towards the floor. It's always anchored into the floor. So I turn the hips, shift the weight over the left shoulder, turn the hips, shift the weight over the right shoulder. And again, it's that left hand that steers the weapon. Left hand pushes to bring the tip back. Left hand drives the cut. Left hand pushes to bring the tip back. Left hand drives the cut. Flow out through the blade and tip. So it's the left hand that causes the tip to move. And more experienced people, see if you can source that from your foot. Nothing is sourced from the arms or the hand. That's a very localized source of power, very small. It's a small generator. It's a small generator station. We want a big generator station. The ultimate big generator station of power and energy is the earth. So just like pushing to the ground turns the hip, shifts the weight, that's actually what's going to be pushing my left hand forward, not my left arm itself. It's also sourced from the ground or from the foot. That's from the foot, through the leg, to the hip, to my elbow, to my hand. Not my arm flexing like doing bicep curls, my arm bringing it up and my shoulders coming up. I maintain the same shape. Whether my hand is down, arm's out, arm is up, same shape. It's just a good shape for being a good conduit. Later on, we can be more flexible and more alive, more flowing, more adaptable, more infinite angles and directions. But when people just do that, they're actually floppy, loose and floppy and collapsed. There's no strong energy flow, there's no structure. So very important that for a long time, our basic structure is here. It can look like it's stiff. It's just that it has shape because of the strong mental current. So I push from the ground. That's what pushes my left hand. So just practice just doing that a few times. It might kind of look like a golf swing, but it's not. And these dynamics and principles will probably help with the golf swing, but we don't want to mix things up. We want to keep this very straightforward. That foot pushing the ground is also what sends my left arm forward. So not my arm coming up, not picking it up with my hand or my arm and happening to be shifting the weight at the same time. No, it's all coming from the same source, from the earth, or from the ground, or from the foot, or the leg, or the hip. More experience, the deeper you source the power, and the bigger generator station that you're tapping into, the earth. So even the raising of the sword is from the ground, from that foot. Pressing down the other leg sends that left hand out, sends the sword out. So if I just work one side a little bit, I get a chance to really focus on these things, on these dynamics. Pressing down through the foot not only shifts the weight, turns the hips, it's what drives that left hand. Pushing down that leg, pushes that left hand. Then I can also work by making this more simple and just doing this one angle. I can work on getting the energy out of the tip, extending out through the tip of the sword. I can work on getting that angle a little cleaner, sharper, cleaner. Those of you with more experience, you want the angle of the blade matching the angle of motion of the weapon. So it's very clean. So in other words, if you're cutting through water, if you're underwater, You'll be able to just cut through the water without any drag. If I have any deviation between the angle of my sword and the angle of trajectory, I'll meet with a lot of drag, and I'll have to push and force that through the water. The same for the other angle. The ground or the foot pushes that left hand out. The other foot pushes that left hand out. Notice if you have any coming in or up, or again, notice any bicep curl. We don't want that. We want the energy not to come in folding the arm, but to go out, lengthening the arm. There's even more of a tendency to do that when we have something in our arms, in our hands, is we'll pull in. So I want that force coming from that foot, not pulling this in. That's caving that trajectory, caving that flow of energy. I want it to extend and elongate my arm. I don't want to collapse it. So if I work this angle, try to source it from the leg, eventually it's from the foot, eventually it's from the ground. Looks like it's coming up and in. No, it's just going out. Because the arms are of a limited length, it has to return. I'm just going out from the ground. I'm just going out through the tip of the weapon, but it has to return because that circle has to come back if you have a limited length. But I'm not bringing it back. If I bring it back, that's the energy there. It's going out, 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 out. It only comes back because it's completely natural to come back. It's like the orbit around a planet, satellite orbiting. It's completely normal, natural, nature, natural forces, nature's action to go in that trajectory, that movement. I'm not making that happen. So that's another thing to focus on, especially if you have more experience. Am I sourcing it to begin with pretty well, but then bringing it back and collapsing using the bicep? This should be sent out, 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 forever out, infinitely out. Just happens to be that's tethered to a limited rope. And so it has to return, but I don't return it. I keep going out, I keep going out, I keep going out. And I get that natural action of having it come over my shoulder totally for me on its own. I'm not doing that. So, of course, that lends itself to this nice, open, elongated feeling. So lots of good basic principles to work on with that simple movement, that simple angle. Let me know if you have any questions. Unmute yourself if you have a specific question at any point.
Yes, Sensei, on this other side, like the second side, I guess my question would be what orbit, like what plane, certainly extending out helps direct that. But I've noticed that there's several sort of, if I was slicing my personal globe in half, I can slice it in several angles. And is that just, those are all possible as long as that feeling's in place? Is that?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Thank you for that question, because that's very true. What angle do you pick? Right. So there's even, you could say, almost infinite number of possible angles, and it is infinite if you slice it thin enough. So that's true. So that's a very good point to bring up. So you can think of 45 or a little sharper. So this would be too flat. Okay. So if you think towards 45, you're getting there. In the actual application, it's actually a little sharper than that. So as long as you're not going flat like this, you don't have to worry about it. Focus more on, is the angle of my blade and the angle of the movement itself precisely the same? Then you don't have to worry about the exact angle. It does bring up, it's an interesting point, an important point, because it does bring up another little more subtle aspect to this. I find, and I think in general, as things get refined, as things become more cleaned up and pristine, things tend to be more verticalized. Where my yokomen might have been kind of loopy before, whether empty hand or sword, kind of loopy, and definitely could be scallopy, but a scallop. But even if there isn't a scallop or scooping, it'll tend to be a little bit more wide. But as you align physically and energetically, things tend to get more pristinely vertical. So now my yokomen is same as Shomen. I just have a slight angle. We talked about turning the foot a little bit to get that different shape. Everything becomes more true to center line or that verticality. So in other words, back to this drill we're doing here, I'll then tend to find that my angle tends to be a little bit sharper towards vertical than lateral. And then when we can choose to do lateral, we are doing a yoko lateral cut. So you can choose to do that angle. I can choose to do a yokomen that's more towards a 45 or greater than 45. I can choose any angle, but the default setting becomes more and more verticalized towards the vertical. So I'm just mentioning that because your question actually just kind of brought that up for me. So that's interesting. Of course, a crude strike, or in this case, a punch, is this big looping punch. A more pristine, efficient strike is, again, more straight, more vertical. It's more refined. It's not that you can't do this, but this is more efficient. It gets there quicker. It's more efficient. The lines of force are more efficient. The travel time is more efficient. So that starts to happen organically as part of the refinement process. So to begin with, it's about 45 degrees, and try to make the blade angle and the movement angle exactly the same. And you may find again that all becomes not exactly 45 degrees, becomes something else later on. But if you continue maybe with just doing one side at a time, really again having that left hand being driven out and driven back by the foot or the ground, and you're not pulling back, you're actually sending it out, 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 sending it out. And it only comes back because your arms are limited length. It's like, again, a satellite or a moon around a planet. That moon or satellite is not trying to go around the planet, right? That satellite, whether it's a man-made satellite or a moon or the planets around the sun, they're not trying to orbit around. Those satellites are going out infinitely. Exactly what we're talking about. This goes out, 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 out. Send your mind out infinitely. That informs your shape, your posture. Flowing out, a little bit more sophisticated. It's actually out in more than one direction. But we don't have to worry about that right now. But it's out, 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 linear, straight, out, infinitely out. The satellites in orbit are not trying to go around the host body. Those satellites are going out, 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 out. They're an infinite number of straight lines away from the host body. Infinite tangent, infinite lines away, directly away and outward from the host body, from the central body. Always going out. But because of the gravitational force, it's not strong enough to get out. The gravitational force is stronger than the size of that smaller satellite. That's why satellites are always smaller. If those satellites were bigger, they'd be going straight out away from that, what was the host body. straight out away, completely straight, completely infinitely away. So this is exactly the same thing. So that might be helpful for you. When you're in a stationary position, infinitely extending. Same thing applies when you are moving. I'm not coming back here. I'm not coming down here. See how that's shortened? I got to cut down. All that's shortened and compromised. Everything is infinite flow, infinite extension. That's the universe. Infinite extension, infinite connection. So coming back is not coming back. So I'm exaggerating by collapsing this way and watch my weight. And same the other way, right? It's exaggerating, it's obvious, it's crude, but that's what we're doing on a very small, it's a smaller with for some people. We want to get out of that realm and go to the infinite, which is also meaning going to the whole, going to the whole thing, out. Now to throw another juicy dish at you, if you have more experience, have the same action, the same movement happening behind you. So you don't have to worry about that now if you don't want to, but eventually talk about refinement. You mentioned that this becomes more verticalized, centralized, organically, naturally, eventually. And so it finds its own angle. To go a little further with that development, it's not just forward. Talk about for a long time, forward intention, forward flow. Eventually, we're not biased to a particular direction because then we're closed off to the whole. And we talked about taking a ready stance, and it's exactly the same on the other side. So, especially if you have a nice simple move, and if you're ready for it, if you have more experience, the same action is happening in the opposite direction behind you. So you can imagine a mirror image, your universal doppelganger, the alternate universe reality going the other direction. That evens you out. That completes you. You're coming more into a completion of yourself and more mirroring and matching the completion of the universe. So this is equally happening behind you, but on a very practical physical level, what that does is it straightens you, it evens you out. So of course, if we're totally frontal, we end up with these things, lean forward, right? So on a very practical level, and this is why we're doing it really, a practical level, is to clean these things up. But it becomes practical more subtly. I also become more aware. I have spidey sense. I have more of a sense that's alive again and open again behind me that I wouldn't have had before because I might be fairly actively aware in front, but the other senses have been dimmed and turned down. So I can have all the senses, the space itself is sensing. The space itself is sensing. The energy body itself is sensing. So imagine this is happening in the same way behind you. Okay, and then just to change this up, we can have an upward cut, upward angle, shifting the weight, turning the hips. Now don't switch your hands around to accommodate the angle coming up. The hands stay fixed because you don't want to be releasing your grip. This is your lifeline, this sword. So don't slide your hands around. Your hands are always in the same position, but you change the angle with your leg and with your elbow and with your wrist to a slight extent. So not sliding your hand to get an angle that you want. Again, coming from the ground. Again, not coming back. You don't have to come back. You keep going out. You keep going out. You keep going out, keep going out, keep going out. It'll come back for you. And that makes a better cut. For those of you that have done Tamashigiri, do cutting actually on the straw mats, we don't want to be coming back. We continue cutting through continuously. It's much cleaner, much more elegant, much more universally symmetrical. Again, don't worry about the exact angle. Try to have just a coherence between the angle of the blade and the angle of the trajectory as best you can. So that takes some flexibility and moving your arms. Again, that left hand is leading the action, steering and driving, but that's actually coming from the legs and the ground. Release the shoulder joints. And send the energy out. Send the energy out. Now, just to touch upon another aspect of what I'm saying about energy goes back to in the same way, just as much back as is forward, and actually it's mirrored in all directions. It's kind of related to the hologram concept of the universe, right? So actually, every part contains everything. Everything is open. But what I wanted to actually touch upon as well, this is related as well, and often I'll use this. Often I feel this. If we talk about, this might get a little bit perplexing or a little bit mind warping, mind blowing. But things do become mind blowing whenever we get to the very, very small or the very, very big, or the whole picture. If I go infinitely forward, whether I'm doing this, doing something here, or a lot of times I'll do this in Shiko, I extend forward so intently and so completely and so infinitely, I feel it come back to hit me in the back. If you go infinitely out, it returns. It's kind of like that old science experiment, science question. It's very old, like hundreds of years old, I think. If you could throw a baseball hard enough, would it go around the earth and hit you in the back? It's like that, but this is on a universal basis. If I just do a basic Hami no Kamae, and if I'm extending infinitely forward, it comes back. It meets me from behind. It's a return wave. That's another way of approaching that the back and the front become more and more equalized and more the same. So whether I'm doing Shiko or whether I'm doing just a stationary, it might look stationary, but it's dynamically, energetically infinite and connected because it is infinite. This is going all the way out. So it's actually coming back and hitting me from behind, which just then fuels more forward out, which brings more back from the back to me again, which fuels more going out. Fuels it even more. So it becomes this universal circuit. That also is another aspect of this, that all directions become enlivened. All directions become manifested, that we're not just frontal. Okay. Now, let's do a high bow with the boken, Choman wall, and we do just a little bit empty hand because the Boken, Jo, they're tools, implements. But really, this is the tool. So let's just take this a little bit empty hand. Exactly the same kind of movements. Let's start just like the way we started. We're going to do a yoko cut, like sideways cut. Other hand is active and alive. You can just have it out here for now. And with practice, that becomes, again, very active. It's all coming from the ground, using our own personal blade. Same action. It's not coming to the side and in. It's going out. Out, 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 out. It only comes back because your arm happens to be physically of a limited length, just like the satellite, only coming around only because it has a limited mass. If it didn't have a limited mass, it'd be continuing out infinitely. Now change it to that downward direction angle. Try to be just as sharp as if this was a razor blade. Bring it from over the head first, so you have a nice setup here. Try to get the same unification, alignment, aliveness, both sides. We can even have the same upward angle. Use those hips, use those legs. Okay. Misogi. This time, in line with what we were doing, follow the same theme. When you expand, we often say expand out from your center. Try to expand back behind you and to the sides, just like a sphere. Expand in all directions, up, down, behind you. Emanating sphere and coming back from all directions. Breathing in, expanding out in all directions equally. You're not favoring any particular direction. One direction is not better than the other. They're all equal.